stories you're about to hear have never been shared before. These stories are often forced to hide and live in the shadows. They have been overlooked. Tonight, I want to give these stories a platform and a voice and bring them out of the shadows.
Hello. My name is Jose Luis. I've been living in the U.S. for 6 years now. I love this country because of what it was able to provide for my sons, for my daughters, and for their children. As a grandfather now, I often think about the life my grandchildren here, how it compares to the life I once had in Mexico, how it's different, and what they're missing. For me, my life growing up in the small town of La Palma was the best way I could have been raised. The people of La Palma were primarily fishermen due to the proximity of the largest lake in Mexico, El Lago de Tachupala. Everyone in La Palma worked very hard, and that included my own family. My father and uncles all dedicated their lives to that lake, just like their father before them had. My uncles taught me everything I needed to know. They taught me the best times to fish. They taught me the best areas, you name it. But they taught me something even more valuable. They taught me that the lake always needed to be respected. That it needed to be treated with respect. It provided food and water for so many. It was magnificent. The least it deserved was respect. I always loved the feeling of being surrounded by water. My favorite days took place on that lake, fishing. My father would then send it to the market, and after it was cut up, looking out on the horizon and only seeing clear blue water. It was peaceful, it was calming. I married at a young age. I fell in love with a beautiful girl that sold fish for her father in the market, and her name is Estela. And she's been by my side now for 53 years. We had 8 children, 5 boys, 3 girls. I taught all of them to fish. I always wanted my children to grow up and share the same values that I had, the respect for the lake. As my boys grew older, they began to take a larger role in the family fishing. We would all wake up in the early mornings. When it was still dark, we would begin our days. My 2 eldest daughters would then work on cleaning and packaging the fish in order to go to the market and sell it. This was our family business. It was our family routine. And we each played an important role. But the lake changed. Started to slowly decrease in volume. My sons and I realized that it took more steps to get to the shore. The beautiful, almost mesmerizing blue had turned a strange, greenish, gray hue. Some of the fish were also dying. We began to see a change in the numbers and the kind of fish that were there. There was a beautiful, we called them los blancos. They were a specific kind of fish that they were shiny, they were white in appearance, and they were present until they eventually became extinct. Sadly, we never saw any more of the blancos while fishing. As some of my sons got older, they began to wonder about other opportunities. They were ambitious, they were curious, and my son Julio, he said the times had changed. He said the lake would never go back to the way it was before. He said that the times of water and fish abundance were no more. He had heard from other men in town that they would attempt to travel to the border. They would try to cross. And he wanted to join them. He convinced my other son, Manuel. And together they left their families behind, Julio and Manuel. They were very successful in the U.S. and eventually convinced a few other children, a few other of my children, convinced a few other of my children to join them. And that was hard for me. I always wanted to pass on my knowledge, the knowledge of the lake, to my sons and daughters, just like my uncles and my father did for me. I felt helpless because the only thing I was able to provide to them, the only thing I could pass on, was no longer useful. I've never shared this with my children. I simply couldn't find the words.
My name is Marta, and I came to this country 22 years ago. I was born in Guanajuato, where my father was a farmer. He used to grow corn and would sell his crops out to the local markets in our town. My brothers and I grew up with a strong connection to nature, since we spent most of our time outdoors. I often think about our daily routines as kids. We used to wake up early in the morning and help my ma fix our breakfast and lunch for school. Occasionally, we would be sent out to feed the chickens and check for eggs. After school, we each had assigned jobs to do for a few hours, and these were mainly outdoors. My brothers would go and help my pa with anything that needed to be done in the fields, and I would be sent to help my ma with laundry and cooking chores. That was always my favorite time of the day. During school, I would always look forward to coming back home and starting dinner with my mother. My pa had set up a large fireplace directly behind our house, where my mother would cook and make her handmade tortillas. We would sit there between all of our trees and work hard on making lots and lots of fresh tortillas for my brothers and father to eat after they worked on the fields. I guess as a child, I never noticed the effects of climate change on our lives. But now that I'm older, I think back to those times that I used to see my parents having serious conversations in the kitchen table while they were drinking their té de limón, while they were eating pan. I never knew what they had talked about. But perhaps they were discussing the fact that each year the harvest kept decreasing. I talk to my father about this now, and I ask him what really happened to our farm. He always blames it on the lack of rain and the ground drying up. But he's not negative about it. I remember he always said this to me. That's how nature works. It gives, but then it takes. And we've got to learn to accept it. Because just like we celebrate when nature gives to us, we need to learn to celebrate when it takes. One day, my pa decided to walk with my brothers and I to school, something he had never done before since he was always working early in the mornings. During our walk, he told us that he had to leave for a few months and that we would not be seeing him, but that we didn't need to worry, because he would send for us to join him once he'd saved enough money. Pa told us that we needed to be really strong because our ma would be needing a lot more help once he was gone. And sure enough, my father sent for my ma, my brothers, and I, and in no more than a week, we joined him in Anaheim, California. I was 9 years old then. I was 9 years old when I started working in the U.S. When I started school in the U.S. And I remember how hard it was for me to make friends at the beginning. Eventually, I learned the language, and I was able to do well. I was a hardworking student, and I loved school. When I was 14, we moved to Marshalltown, Iowa, and I began school there. I had plans to attend college, but because I was undocumented at the time, I didn't have the opportunity. So after I graduated, I had to begin working at the meat packing plant in our town. Today, I've been working there for 13 years. That's where I met my husband, Agustin, and we have 3 wonderful children now. Sadly, I've only been able to visit Mexico 2 times since we came here 22 years ago. I took my 2 youngest kids with me the last time that I was there, and I remember them playing outside all day during the length of our stay. They loved it. It makes me sad to think that their lives here in this country are a lot different than the life I had growing up in Mexico. They will never have the same experiences that my brothers and I had while spending most of our time outside. I hope someday they're able to establish a similar connection to nature.
My name is Marcos Cervantes, and in the past, I was a farmer. I grew corn in a 7-acre plot of green, mountainous land north of the Mexico-Guatemala border, just as my father once did, and his father before him. My hometown was a beautiful little place, snuggled in between 2 mountains, everywhere that you looked. And you would find yourself surrounded by long, green fields. It was a beautiful feeling to know that I was dedicating myself to the land, and in return, it would give back so much to me and my family. What more could I ask for? I woke up early every day to work on the fields, and all of my hard work would be rewarded during the harvesting season. One of my favorite parts of my days was my regular walk down the length of the fields to check on the progress of the crops. I did a lot of thinking during these walks. Every day, after a long day of work, I would come back home to me and my family, and we would eat dinner together. It was my routine. It was familiar. It was a good life. The year was 1995. I would have never expected that my life could completely change just because of the weather. The rainfall this year was nothing like I'd ever seen before. We planted our seeds, but the earth was no longer productive. We'd have too much rain, even more than the previous years, and the harvests were completely ruined. Also in 1994, NAFTA was enacted by Mexico, Canada, and the United States, allowing for a free market between the 3 countries. I wasn't very educated in the trade deal, and I couldn't have foreseen the impact it would have on my life. Because of NAFTA, the little corn that I was able to produce became impossible to sell. I could no longer compete with American corn. I tried cutting costs as much as I could, but it just wasn't possible to make a profit, and my family began to suffer from it. Food on our table slowly began to decrease. I became increasingly more worried about our future, which was looking very uncertain. The year is 1996. This was the year I left everything behind. I had to ensure my family's survival. Mexico, a large country that I still, to this day, hold very close to my heart. I was unfortunately unable to provide any chances for survival for my family and I. The choice of migrating was very, very difficult. No one in my immediate family had ever left our town. I was very scared, and I would be the first to attempt the long but hopeful journey to the land of opportunity. I left behind my wife and our 5 children. I left 3 months after our newest baby girl was born. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done in my entire life. I was afraid of what would happen if something were to go wrong. My journey to America was fairly easy. It only took me 7 days to reach San Diego. And I quickly found a temporary job in a nearby town. 7 months later, I met Don Angel, an owner of several successful Mexican markets. He offered me a job in his new market in Atlanta, Georgia. I worked very hard for Don Angel, sometimes working 16 hours a day. But eventually, he promoted me to a manager position. In 1998, after 2 years of being apart from my family, I had finally saved enough money to bring them all to this country. My little girl, Vera Diana, was now 3 years old. 3 years of her life I had completely missed. I still think about that sometimes. I hope I was able to make up for that in the years that followed. After several years of working for Don Angel in Atlanta, he gave me an opportunity to open my own market in a different state, Iowa. Fast forward 7 years, and here I am now still running a successful business of my own. Never in a million years would I have thought that my life would change so drastically. I went from doing what generations in my family had always done, farming, to being a business owner in a new country. Ironically, I resettled in a state that primarily grows corn and often find myself surrounded by those same long green fields. Corn, also known as maize, originated and was first cultivated in Mexico. As I look out into the fields, I can't help but think that corn is perhaps the largest contribution my people have made to this country.